this morning I had this really weird dream. So I will occasionally dream about soccer, not that often, but when I do, it's pretty vivid usually. So I had this dream that this actually involved Nashville SC. So I had to design a Nashville SC jersey, and it had to
Okay.
be like a brick theme, right? So like bricks, like, red bricks. And so I went with the Kool-Aid Man motif.
Nice. I
Kool-Aid
like
Man.
it.
Yeah, busting through some bricks, and yeah, it was awesome. Everybody seemed to love it. So I'm just kind of curious. Have you had dreams about soccer? Do you vividly dream about part of your job?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say part of my job is an answer acceptable from my soccer past. I don't know
Mhm.
if you want to hear about that. I don't know how
Yeah, yeah.
interesting it would be, but so when I in college, I used to frequently have, I don't know if nightmares is the right term, but
Mhm.
I used to think that I was going back and having to try out for my high school team again because it was very. I know this seems funny now, but like a tryout, trying out. But it wasn't clear if like I was actually going to make the team as a senior in high school. So like at that point in time, it was very stressful, like leading up to the tryout and then the week or so of tryouts, whatever. So so I made the team, and then but in college I would have these nightmares of that I had to try out like again for my high school team. So I know that sounds really weird, but it was just something that happened that like, and then I was entering tryouts like out of shape and like wasn't prepared. So that's really the only dreams that I can think of about soccer itself. I can't say I've had anything about the job, about like the job what we do.
So
So
you dreamt that you were 2023 Diego Fagundes.
Emergency podcast. Better did a thing, so we gotta talk about it. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency. Emergency podcast. Shut up, oh yeah, shut up, oh yeah, shut up. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency.
Hey, a hearty hello to you all, and welcome to Emergency Podcast, the brand new podcast coming from Verde All Day, of course, talking about Austin FC, and it's going to also feature various members of the Austin FC media multiverse. So, joining us today for this inaugural episode is from the Austin American Statesman, Colby Gordon. How you doing?
doing well. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Yeah. So just kind of let people know, first of all, just kind of how you came to cover Austin for the Statesman, because people had associated Chris Bills with that before, and then Chris Bills went over to the Striker, and then lo and behold, Colby appeared in the press box and has been a great addition since then.
Well, you're kind. Thank you. I was kind of just, I mean, first of all, I've got to say, I mean, I got a little bit lucky. And so I think there's that. But I had been freelancing with Statesman for several years. And then, Chris had Chris had started up the Striker,
Mhm.
and then the Statesman had moved another writer in to cover Austin FC for the first season. And actually, I don't want to speak for Chris or other people, so I may have that timeline wrong. Anyway,
No, you're right. Yeah, this was Craven,
okay.
right?
Yeah. So Mike Craven was covering Austin FC for the first season, and
Mhm.
then he took Mike, who's a good guy.
Mhm.
He took, and I mean, both Mike and Chris are really good dudes, really good writers as well.
Agreed.
And so Craven took a job somewhere else, and he had to move to Dallas.
Yeah, he answered
And
the
so
sultry sirens call of high school recruiting for college football,
sure, right, yeah. So he took, and then yeah, so he's with Dave
which
Campbell's
which
football.
way too many people care about.
So I mean, I can't diss on it because that's a big part of my job.
Right,
So
right.
so he took a job with Dave Campbell's football and was covering I think mainly colleges now, and doing a lot of high school or doing some high school stuff too, but he's doing a lot of college. And
Mhm.
so I
Baylor,
had
like
contacted,
an inordinate amount of time.
yeah, yeah. So he left. This was like late August of the initial season.
Mhm.
And so he left, and so I contacted the sports editor and I said, "Hey, I don't know what you guys are, have this plan for this, but if you need help finishing out the season, the first season." I said, I grew up playing soccer. I played a couple years in college. Just that I'd like to think I know what I'm talking about. And so Jason Jarrett, who was sports editor at the
Mhm.
time, was like, "Yeah, sure." So, kind of finished out the first season, maybe from the last 7 weeks of the first season, and then just stayed on through that in the second and third seasons, and then it was fortunate enough to get hired on full time by the Statesman last May.
Mhm.
I was kind of like half. I cover high school stuff and Austin FC. So that's a very long story and how that came about. So yeah, I just got lucky and very blessed, and a lot of ways. So that's how that kind of came about. So if that answers the question at all,
Yeah,
so.
yeah, for sure. And then I noticed that you use L Tree, which I think is one of the more hated nicknames for Austin FC. I think it's kind of droll and funny. How did that come about? How did you fall into using?
It was just something that, and in fact, it's kind of funny that you mentioned that we've actually started to decrease the use of that.
Mhm.
Like this year, it's something that just kind of continued from Craven,
Mhm.
and just because because when you're writing, you know, you could mention Austin FC 50 times in an article.
Yes.
So it was something else just to have something else to mention.
Mhm.
But I know there's been a lot of negative feedback on that. So like personally, I've tried to scale back that use this season, and kind of just saying, whether it's using Austin FC a whole bunch or using Verde and Black, that's so yeah. But it was really just something I had continued from Craven, and just something to not write Austin FC 50 times in an article.
Mhm.
And but yeah, now this year just tried to scale back using that and just tried not to use it as much at all. So as you realize, there's been some negative feedback with that. So
Oh, I think you should double down on it.
well, it's I understand that. I mean, everyone's entitled to their opinion and what they like and don't like, and I understand why some fans would not like it, whether you're a fan of the Mexican national team or not. So
Mhm.
I can understand, just if you're a fan of a certain CONCACAF country, then other than Mexico, then you probably wouldn't like the use of that nickname.
Mhm.
But if you're a fan of the Mexican national team, then using that nickname you'd probably be okay with. So
Yeah,
that's
except
uh,
unless you
broad
think there are negative
sense.
connotations
Sure.
compared to
Yeah.
Snapseed and the Mexican national team. So there's that too. I know Alexi Lawless was trying to make the Oaks happen. So
Oh,
that's a
really?
I think
Okay.
I don't think anybody has used the Oaks in a while. So yeah, I
Yeah.
just think it's Verde because it's simple and
Sure.
we're
Yeah.
just the team, them.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
I
Right.
mean,
Exactly.
I was kind of rooting for the start actually that they were going to go with Austin Athletic, which I think was another one of the names that was being bandied about. And then you could get Atleti and you can get all kinds of, things from that would be much more interesting than, I know that some people call it also the FC. So, and I know
Hmm.
that there are a lot of fans that are also galled by that, but like people that, hang out in maybe, like hang out in the Lexus Club, or whatnot, might be more prone to call it the FC. I think it's funny. I mean, call the team what you want. I'm good with
Right.
that. But I just think
Yeah.
I think it's funny that people have the reactions that they do. So let's go ahead and, speaking of reactions that people are having, let's go ahead and talk about the current emergency. And to me, the emergency this week heading into the game against Houston, which is happening tomorrow night, we are recording this way later than we thought we would on Friday evening, is the road form and the shots on goal, both of them in 3 away games, right? So obviously the home form has been decent at times. Certainly in the last 2 matches, we've seen more shooting, we've seen more action, we've seen more goals, we've seen more excitement. But as the last game against St. Louis showed us, the road woes continue. So first of all, just kind of your take on that. Just kind of, do you think that this is a different team on the road than at home, or do you think that there's just kind of a luck factor there and it's basically the same team that rolls out every game?
Well, I mean, I think the results and the numbers you have to look at and say, why is this team not creating chances or just plain taking shots on the road?
Mhm.
And I mean, yeah, to your point, it's the numbers are startling.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't think if you just looked at the numbers, I mean, you would be like, oh my God, what is going on?
Right. Is it food
And
poisoning? Are they being kidnapped at the hotel and then only
right,
return to the stadium right before the game?
right.
Right.
And I'm not, I try, I try not to be, I try not to overreact to things and try and look at things from a more broad sense. But if you just looked at the numbers, like I said, I mean, you'd be like, I mean, this is bad. But like watching the games, like particularly the St. Louis game, yeah, I mean, they had the bulk of the possession, but then they didn't do much with it in
Mhm.
St. Louis's final third, whenever they had the ball there. And so, like, sometimes it seems like there's trying to they're trying to make too many extra passes. And instead, if you're that close, if you're outside the box, just let one rip.
Mhm.
But like from a broad sense of like trying not to overreact, it's a 3 game sample size. Seattle, the performance wasn't great, but they still got a draw.
Mhm.
Orlando City, and I wrote this today. Drucy didn't play against Seattle.
Mhm.
Orlando City, again, didn't really look that good. I thought as against St. Louis, particularly the first half, I think they looked fine.
Mhm.
And then the second half, the goal comes, and then there wasn't a reaction to the goal offensively where you thought there would be more urgency and trying to pepper St. Louis's goalkeeper and trying to counter and tie things up. That's kind of where I'm at, and where like I'm really interested to see how they play tomorrow night, because even like John Gallagher mentioned yesterday in a midweek media session that like the players had a meeting
Mhm.
just among themselves to talk
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's like they are, and I wrote this in my advance for the Statesman. It's like the players are aware of it. I mean, they know what's going on.
Mhm.
So I think tomorrow night it's going to be really interesting to see how they come out and play with, as you pointed out, the offensive numbers on the road being so poor.
Right. Yeah, I
So
was struck. I was struck in the last game, just kind of looking at the perception, kind of springboarding off what you're saying about the players only meeting, which, yeah, that struck me too. And that was real interesting that he revealed that. But Wolf seems to be kind of a lot more positive about how the team's playing. He said, "Oh, I thought, in that St. Louis game, we should have gotten a point and maybe more." And it's like, maybe more. You didn't have a shot on goal. How would you get more unless you like earned a penalty sort of setup? I mean, I don't, I mean, to my view, I kind of thought that Austin didn't play all that great, but St. Louis didn't play all that great either in the first half. So it was kind of this weird chess match where they were just kind of bumping pawns up against each other. And then all of a sudden, Klaus gets the goal on, a play where St. Louis breaks down Austin pretty effectively. And then that's just kind of the whole game. Was Orlando, I mean, it just seemed like kind of more of a malaise. I mean, they were down 2-0, and then they're they're horseshoeing around in the 80th minute down 2 goals. And it's like, what are you doing? I mean, it seemed like kind of anti-urgency. I mean, it almost kind of seemed like they were, you know, I don't know that they were like kind of doing that just to spite whoever. I don't know. It was weird. I mean, what did you think of that moment? Like, you remember this, right? In the Orlando City game
Yeah,
they played,
and
and they're
you
just kind of passing it around the back. And did it seem to you like, I mean, I'm loath to use like giving up because I don't think they're giving up, but it just didn't seem like they were really interested in trying to mount a comeback, which was weird.
Yeah, and you did a good job of bringing that up in the post-game press conference, and it was very strange.
Mm-hmm.
That, like as you mentioned, and I even kind of saw some of that in the St. Louis match,
Mm-hmm.
where it just didn't, there wasn't a ton of like energy or
Mm-hmm.
urgency in
Yeah.
going for the equalizer.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, against Orlando, that was like you said, the last 10, 15 minutes were just strange.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's almost like they were just playing like they weren't down 2-0.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so I
And
mean
like
it
they were
was
2-0 up, right?
right. Yeah, yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean it was very odd. And yeah, and like you saw, like I said, against St. Louis, I think there was a little bit of that just there wasn't the urgency that you would expect trying to go for the equalizer. And like Ring, even to Ring's credit, he mentioned that in the post game press conference too.
Yeah.
He said, I forget what his exact terminology was, but he just, it seemed like we didn't have that like final push or kill
Mhm.
or whatever he said. I have to look up what he said again, but we didn't have that final, oomph in the third and in their third.
Yeah.
So it was just strange, and I don't know if you chalk that up to, is it a trend? Like
Mhm.
like like we're discussing, is it a trend, or is it just these were 3 road games where things happened and they didn't look great? I agree with you. You're like, I think I think Ring's analysis in post game of this could have been the best we could have done, would have been a 0-0 draw. I think that's the more accurate outlook
Mhm.
from the overall standpoint of that game.
Yeah. But the thing that's puzzling to me is that they don't really have like a true catalyst. They don't really have a true playmaker. Like Driussi's not a natural 10. Like Driussi is a second striker who needs service, needs to combine, things like that. I mean, Fagundes in 22 is kind of more of that wide playmaker that I think that this system probably needs. I mean, we talked about Rigoni and like his kind of inability to do that. I mean, Wolf has kind of been involved a little bit with some of that kind of combination creation. But at home, I mean, it seems like they're able to, they've been at least able to do that kind of more. They've been able to not only get the ball in the final third, but they begin to kind of figure out some combinations that work and put some passes together. And Rubio, I think, has certainly been helpful in that. But it just seems like on the road, they forget that. And there's not like kind of one person who can really take the team on its back and drive the ball in and create those chances. It just seems like they just kind of progress the ball and possess it, but then nobody really has an idea of what to do when they get there, which is weird, which is troubling because certainly against Dallas and San Jose, I mean, they seem like a lot more, competent in terms of what they were doing, and even some of the other home games this year. But it seems like on the road they just kind of forget all that. And I don't know. I mean, I know that Wolf has talked about playing with a little bit more caution on the road, that there's kind of more of an awareness of that. And I know that Gallagher has he talked about this midweek, and he talked about this kind of in preseason too when I talked to him at Coachella, that basically he's not getting as forward as he was. I know like in 22 when the team
Right.
was doing really well, the fullbacks would play up and there were kind of more fulcrum points around that. And I think they just leaked so many goals in 23 that Wolf seems to want people back and they're emphasizing defense. And so that's not really happening. But at the same time, there's not anybody that's really progressing it. I mean, last year they would try, kind of aimless crosses to nowhere, and this year they're not even really doing that much. I mean, I think they're kind of hoping to get the ball in the final third and then hoping that like kind of Rubio and Driussi will connect, but it really does seem like they're going to need one more catalyst. And I don't know necessarily that that's coming in the summer. I know that Dessler's coming as a fullback, but he to me seems like a pure defensive fullback. Like he doesn't seem like he's somebody that really, you look at his numbers, he's not really a get forward kind of guy. Like he's kind of a lockdown outside defender, has great numbers there, but doesn't have really the progressive numbers that kind of your more adventurous MLS wingbacks might.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, speaking of the summer, it's going to be very interesting to see what, if anything, they do.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I think the contracts of Rigoni,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, anyone who's read anything I've written the past 16 months know that I think the contracts of Rigoni and Zardes, I think, in my opinion, get your take on it. I mean, I think those are killing the club.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are anchors on how it's, lack of activity the last couple of transfer windows. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, looking at this, not to jump all over the place here, but looking at this team's bench,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you look at the options that come off the bench,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm like, okay. And look, and this is nothing personal against any of these guys. They've all been very nice to deal with for the most part. So it's nothing personal, but
That's not the issue.
I mean, yeah, exactly. But like when Rigoni is making $2.2 million,
Mm-hmm.
and I know not all that counts against the cap. Yeah, I understand that.
A lot of it
But
does.
you still have somebody making that amount of money, and he's just been, and coming off the bench, he has, especially this year, he just hasn't provided anything.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, DPs really need to provide results. I mean, I think it was, you and I think in the middle of last year, we were starting to calculate like goals per dollar in the salary with the forwards. So that was, and a lot of that had to do with the Rudy too. I mean, Rudy had a really productive 2022 and then dropped off in 2023 and wasn't even seen as a viable option when they went around to revisit kind of who they were going to bring in for 2024. It seems like they would have rather kind of taken their chance. I mean, do they really have a third forward at this point? I mean, they've got Rubio and they've got Zardes, and like kind of who else would they bring in if it's not those two?
Yeah. I mean,
they've talked about putting Rigoni in there, and I know that that's kind of been something that they did towards the tail end of last year, but Fodry's been kind of injured and more focused on Verdos than playing. And he's really, he's best as an inverted left winger. Like I talked to his college coach when he first got drafted, and it's like, no, he's not a center forward. He's an inverted left winger. So like, that's kind of his spot. That's what he does well at, which is great. I know people have talked about Pino and trying to give him a run out. So I guess, it's to me, it's kind of amusing to factor in, and you saw it too, I think. I mean, you've seen Verdos play. So just kind of the drop off between the MLS level and the MLS Next Pro level is pretty staggering as the Open Cup, right? So I think there's
it was, I mean, it's pretty large. I mean, yeah, it is for anyone who hasn't gone out there. I mean, there's a reason Next Pro is considered the third division,
right,
in the U.S. pyramid and not the second. And it's, I mean, these in the general soccer playing ability, the guys in Next Pro are obviously still very good, but when compared to other professionals, I mean, the gap between MLS and MLS Next Pro, like you said, I mean, it is wide. It is very wide. So, yeah, you're dead on there. I mean, like there is no third striker really.
Yeah.
I mean, and when was the last, or who was the last striker that this club had that wasn't like over 29 years of age? Was it Busa?
Yeah, I mean those are the options. You're either 21 or you're over 30.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I mean, like that.
Nobody can be 27 and play striker in this team.
Right. Well, yeah. And that's one of the things I was
stunned about in the off season was I was a fan of Diego Rubio, and from what he did at, like, I'm from Kansas City, and so I was a fan of what he did at Kansas City and from what he did in Colorado.
Yeah.
And so I thought bringing him in was a good move, but I was surprised they didn't get another striker
Right.
besides
Yeah.
him. You know,
Yeah.
even somebody, even if you have to pay somebody who's 22 or 23 and only pay them 225,000 or something like
Right.
that. I mean,
If those people existed. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, we
true.
hear
Yeah,
that
good
there
point.
are, yeah, we hear there are these limited resources, but I mean, how limited are they? I'm kind of curious to get Roto back and have a conversation heading into summer about how things are looking. And there are some rules, obviously. I mean, you've seen the new rules that have come about, and I think there's a little bit more flexibility that might be afforded them, but at the same time, there are not infinite wells of money, apparently. There's not enough jellyfish being sold. I know it doesn't work that way. There are other complicating factors in MLS roster rules that don't have to do with the amount of jellyfish that you sell and the amount of
Sure. Sure. But it is to your point, it is interesting that, I mean, in November, when they didn't bring 9, 10 guys back, something like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, you just cleared a bunch of cap space. I mean, Urruti alone was making 800,000.
Yeah, somewhere in there. I think it was like seven. Yeah, I want to say
Yeah.
6, 7.
So, and then the off season, you bring in 4 guys, and so I don't. Yeah, it's too bad we don't. It's too bad we don't have access in other sports where you can look at all the numbers that stack up against the certain salary cap numbers. So, like, it would be just interesting, like you pointed out a couple minutes ago, it would just be interesting to see exactly how little space and little money they seem to be that Roto seems to be working with.
We should ask that. We should just post-match press conference one day. Can we see the books, Josh?
Yeah, right.
Or just arrange with Roto and just take a look.
Or the next time Roto's available, just
yeah.
I mean, I guess
Roto's been pretty forthcoming, but yeah, you're
Yeah.
right though. I mean, it's compared to kind of NFL or NBA where it's an open book and you kind of know exactly what it is. I know that MLSPA Christmas is coming up soon. Should be probably
Right.
next few weeks that we'll begin to see the salaries and what they are. But yeah, but the idea of not knowing the exact amount of GAM, not knowing what the cap space is, not knowing what they have to play with. I mean, Dessler's probably, I'm guessing, kind of based on numbers, probably going to be around like a 600K salary kind of player, right? So probably
Yeah,
something
I
like
think
that. I
that's
mean,
a
it doesn't
good.
sound like it doesn't sound like he's going to be like super beyond that, but at the same time, like that's, given Zardes, given Hedges, given the DP,
Right.
that's kind of considerable salary, right? So,
Well, and even and to your point there, like prorated across. I mean, because for at least for this year, presumably, I mean, he's only going to be on the books for, let's just say, half the season, just to simplify
right,
things. So,
sure, yeah,
so 300 grand, which in the grand scheme of things may not be a lot, but for this club, it may be.
yeah, yeah. That's kind of my worry. Like, I think maybe one other player's coming in the summer. I hope it's more, but yeah, you just kind of wonder, right? Like, I mean, you thought that all these players would be coming in, and then it was Obreon, through the entry draft, and then it was Rubio, which we haven't heard the numbers yet, but we've heard that it's probably kind of on the lower side compared to, where he, certainly where he was a couple of years ago, but also just kind of in relation to the other kind of starting caliber offensive players on this team. And then we didn't get like, too much else in the way of additions. I mean, we got Heinz Ike, and I'm blanking on the other. We got one other. Oh, Cleveland.
Cleveland.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't suspect like those are going to be like kind of huge salaries. I think that, but it's weird that you had like all this kind of salary going out and you have relatively little going in. So maybe it is being saved for the summer, or maybe it's just like, oh, we are getting to the place where we're now a functional roster again, spend wise, if not playing wise.
No, for sure, exactly. I mean, I think that's one. I mean, that's the other big
mystery around the club is that, like we just saying, it looked like that the club cleared all that salary in November, and then, as you mentioned, even Roto said in one of the, I think the January press conference, these like that they needed guys to come in at lower salaries. So, like you just mentioned, I'm really interested to see what Rubio, Hindsight, and O'Brien are making. I'm assuming Cleveland's probably only making like $120,000, and
I would say
only
200 probably. Yeah.
Oh, really? You think that? Interesting. Okay.
He was a pretty solid backup. So like I imagine he was probably making that much at Seattle. I'd have to look. Yeah, that's
Well,
on the list of things to do. Look up what Stephen Cleveland made last year at Seattle. So
sure. Right.
those are,
Well,
yeah, you have these moments too, right? Hey, here's this obscure thing that I need to like
yes.
crack
Yeah.
down.
No. All the time, and sometimes I'll forget many of them too. But yeah. But I mean, I would
Probably go
assume
nowhere. Here we go.
exactly. But I would assume I'm assuming Rubio is probably making 375, 400.
Sounds
Is
right.
that,
Yeah.
yeah. And Oberon maybe 250. And
Maybe more, maybe a
maybe
little more.
higher.
But
Okay.
he was, but yeah, but he was in the reentry draft. So at
Yeah.
that point, it's like, okay, here you go. Here's what we're
Right. Yeah.
right. So that could be, yeah. I mean, maybe there's performance incentives in there. Who knows?
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's another, yeah, that's another thing I'm kind of curious too. When we get Roto again, it's just kind of, okay, how much incentivizing is there in these contracts? Is it just like you make what you make, or here's a chance to kind of do more, or
Sure.
if you hit a certain number of minutes, does your DP status auto renew, and do you come back to the team making 1.6
Right. Right.
and maybe, yeah, I mean that's been interesting. I mean we've gotten to talk to Ring more this year, so we've gotten to kind of see a little bit more of his character, but it does seem like, I don't know if it's fair to say that he's kind of aging on the field more than he has in previous seasons. But I know I have seen inklings, heard murmurings out there about him looking like he's maybe kind of not the player he was. But then you see him, make that tackle in the St. Louis game, which probably saves a goal. And so,
Right.
yeah, he still has these kind of moments in him. Like he's still a capable player. But again, it all kind of boils down to, okay, you're a designated player. You're one of the three highest paid players on this team, and these players need to produce. And you know I don't think
Yeah.
any goal contributions at this point, not that that's really what he does, but then
Right.
again, Bergoni doesn't either, and that's
Right.
typically what a winger should do. you
Right.
should you should
No.
should get some goals and assists out of your winger, who sometimes
Yeah.
plays.
Well, yeah, I mean that's a good point, and I mean on Ring especially is that he hit some benchmarks last year
Mhm.
that basically automatically renewed his contract for this
Yeah,
year.
yeah,
So
and
you don't.
we think those are just minutes, right? We don't think there's anything kind of beyond that. Like,
Agreed.
yeah,
Yeah, agreed.
if you
And
sub
the
in
way
at center back an inordinate amount of times, we want to renew your contract.
that's what I don't know, and not to go all. I don't want to go all conspiracy
No,
theory
no, no.
here,
Come on,
but
come on. Bring it, bring it.
if the
Other people have,
if
so I know
the
what you're gonna say.
no, I'm just saying, like, if the beginning of last year was really strange with Ring, okay, they basically were like, okay, he's not going to be captain,
Mhm.
and you're like, okay, and then
You were at
he
that
didn't
press conference, right?
start.
You were at that first press
Yes,
conference, yeah, where
yes,
yeah,
yeah,
they did it at Q2, and it's like, here's Drewsy,
yes.
here's your new captain.
Yeah, it was incredibly odd, I thought.
Uh,
I don't know. Yeah.
full force.
So yeah, right, right. And then Ring doesn't start. And
Mhm.
so I don't know, you don't know, was the club maybe looking at it where like it was got to a point where they're like he wasn't in their long-term plans, and then they had all these injuries occur at center back, and then
Right.
they basically had to play him at
Mhm.
center back, and then
that caused his contract,
Right.
to kick in for this year. And again, I don't know if that's tinfoil hat stuff or not, but I think it's something to at least ponder.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, and I mean, I think people have. Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, because even though he was relied upon and was certainly professional in terms of the center back stuff, like he made it a distinct point not to talk to us all season.
Yes, and I will say, and again, I try not to be hot take guy here, but I will say that was disappointing and kind of annoying.
Mhm. Yeah. And that's the
So
thing. I mean, like this year it's changed. So we have locker room access where we didn't before. Before it was a more, what's the word? A curated experience, we'll say, right? So where they would bring in
right,
certain players, we would ask for Ring, it would become our joke, right? So
right, yeah.
because Ring wasn't going to talk. I know that one time we got him when CONCACAF ran things during Leagues Cup, he came by in a mix zone and refused to talk, even though he was there, we were there, we had mics ready, things like that. But this year he's been really forthcoming. He's been really great. I mean,
Yeah,
he's dry, he's kind of droll, but he's also no
yeah,
nonsense, and he's a good guy. I mean, he
yeah,
definitely
he is.
like I don't think he stopped caring, but I certainly think that like whatever happened that led to the captaincy being stripped and all the weirdness and stuff. I mean, something definitely happened that was damaging for a time to that relationship. And that seems like it's better now, but it still seems kind of trucy in a way. I don't know. Maybe I'm just reading things into it, but it
No,
doesn't seem like he's pals with Wolf necessarily. It doesn't seem like he has kind of the camaraderie maybe that, again, and that brings a whole question. Who does Wolf have a camaraderie with on the team, right? So last year there was this kind of perception of I know that this was kind of being bandied about a little bit, kind of the Boy Scouts, right? So that there were certain players that seemed like they were kind of bought in more with what Wolf was doing. And I think a lot of that had to do with like all the Fagundes weirdness that happened at the start of the season, which
do you do you
manifested, as you'll remember, with the first Houston away game. So which is what
right.
we're about now. So good times always associated with Shell Energy Stadium and games that are played there.
No,
Or so
I would
fun.
say, do you mind expanding? And this is your podcast, so I don't
Oh yeah,
you
yeah.
take it where you want. But do you mind expanding on the Boy Scout thing?
That's just kind of something that I've heard bandied about, but like players kind of like Finley, like Stuver, that have that kind of work ethic that are kind of bought into the system in the same way that, kind of maybe understand, kind of the Wolf slash Berhalter philosophy, right? Just kind of from being, kind of in that school, from being around that sort of
Okay,
that sort of atmosphere, knowing kind of that system. Like Jimenez in a way is kind of the same thing, right? So because he came out of the
sure,
crew versus players that maybe, kind of, let's just say maybe kind of came in from, just outside the US system altogether, right? So,
sure, okay,
kind of grew up with different kinds of styles of play,
sure,
maybe different kinds of perspectives, things like that. And I mean, last year, I mean, it just seemed like there was this kind of weird rift, which I think a lot of it had to do maybe with the Fagunda situation. I mean, again, you'll remember,
sure.
Wolf called him out
Yes,
after that game, after he
yes.
got the big contract. And yeah, I don't know if you remember this because I was actually in Houston for that. So I was in
Okay,
the press conference room with Wolf and then had to go share that with Fagundes. Like he dropped that bomb and then Fagundes is outside the locker room and Fagundes hadn't heard it obviously because he wasn't in the press conference. So I was like, "Oh yeah, Josh just said this about you and just wanted to know what you had to say in response to that." And then all these fireworks start going off in the stadium. Like this isn't kind of the bowels of the stadium like in the north end, but there's like this tunnel and like this weird echo effect. And like just as I'm starting to ask him this, like I'm a recorder, like all these fireworks go off and it's just like major noise, major confusion. It was very terrible to transcribe that interview, but you've been there. You're a soldier, right? What it's
yeah, yeah, no, for
situations.
sure. No, that's okay. That's yeah, because I remember being, and forgive me, I've forgotten you were at the stadium
Yeah.
for that, but I remember on the post game presser just being when Josh said, essentially he said like, well, we gave him this contract in the off season and that was
Mhm.
something we didn't have
to do. And like you said,
Yeah.
he basically called Diego out for coming into camp out of shape.
Right.
And yeah, and that okay, and I that was which is and what was what when you told Diego that, what was his response?
He was, I mean, I think he was kind of put off, but he was also okay. Well,
Sure.
if that's what the coach says, and that's what the coach says, and I have to perform better. Yeah, like
Hmm.
his mouth was saying the right things, but his eyes
Sure.
were kind of communicating that, oh, I don't like this very much at all. I can't believe that this just got said. Right. So,
Well, I remember when he got injured, and then his maybe first or second game back from injury. I remember he was the player made available,
mhm,
and it may have been you, or may not have been you, but I think it was you, and if not, forgive me. But I think the first question, it was like, you got in 30 minutes or whatever in the second half, and I don't remember what game it was, but it was one of the first or second games he was back from injury.
right.
And I remember he was basically like, like, and your question, or maybe it wasn't here, but the question was like, you got in 30 minutes, how did that feel or whatever? And it was nice to be back on the field. And his response was basically, I mean, I could have played a lot more, but it's
Right.
up to the coaches to put me on the field. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah. Well, of course. I mean,
So
yeah, I mean, like he's I'll play until I drop. I mean,
sure.
you remember the Open Cup game in San Antonio where he played like what 120 minutes or
Yeah, no, for
something
sure.
like that. Like it was, yeah, it
That
was
yeah, that was
so
impressive. And I mean, this kind of plays in, and we have like the Galaxy are coming to Austin
yes, they
next
are.
week, so it'll
Yeah.
be interesting.
Yeah, if he even gets in. I mean that's kind of the weird thing. I mean, obviously the deal I think made sense because they needed help in 23 like pretty desperately. Like they need, and then they just broke the bank on two DP wingers like over the off season. So I mean
Yeah, that's a
that's kind
good
of
point.
curious. Yeah, obviously, Diego's a great player and a great human being and all this, but it to me it was kind of telling that like, okay, we're really glad to have you here playing wing, and oh, we're going to spend a lot of money on these really expensive, really good wingers, and we're going to give them DP status. And one of them, Joseph Paintsel, is probably going to be like a best 11. So, that just, I
Yeah,
mean, fortunately he can play, he can also play 10 if he needs to, but,
sure.
they also have Ricky Pooch there. So, yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, it's an interesting, I mean, it's an interesting role for him. And it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of like evolve. And I got to see him in preseason. I got to see him in the Coachella game. And, Gallagher was paired up against him for most of the time. And Gallagher talked about, yeah, I pretty much shut him down, and all that. So it wasn't quite that cocky, but
sure.
it was the idea of like, yeah, he didn't end up really kind of doing much in the way of affecting the game. Like I think he had maybe, like a key pass or two in there and things like that, but kept him pretty quiet in terms of like actual goals or actual assists. So yeah, interesting. That's gonna be I think that's gonna bring on a whole other level of emergency. So I don't know. Let's kind of wrap up by just kind of thinking your projections for this Houston game. I mean, do you think that this is something where Austin can get something out of this, or do you think that the road woes will continue?
Well, I went in my preview. I guess I got a little bold here because I'm predicting a 1-1 draw.
Okay.
So
I think
I
that's
I
reasonable.
I'm interested to I'm really interested to see how they come out tomorrow
Mhm.
or in the game,
Yeah,
and after having, essentially what sounded like a players only meeting on Monday or Tuesday to
right.
kind of talk about stuff. So
To fix things,
and,
yeah. So
yeah, and this is also recency bias that I think Houston was incredibly fortunate to win against
mhm,
Minnesota. I
mhm,
mean,
mhm.
yeah, I mean the goalie whose name I should know, who I'm now completely blanking on, but some of the saves he made were just unreal.
Steve Clark.
Yeah, Steve Clark, of course. Yeah,
Worst
Steve.
haircut in
Yeah, good.
MLS, Steve Clark.
That's right. There you go. That's right. So I predicted in the advance I wrote, I predicted 1-1 draw, and we'll see what happens. I think if there's a repeat of one shot and an expected goals of 0.04, that I think that's going to be a huge sign. And I mean, the fans are going to be beside themselves if there's another one of those.
Right. Yeah. Did I say 1-1 draw? I meant 0-0 draw. It's in the paper.
Yeah, it's already published.
Let me go on the Statesman's CMS and
yeah, right.
No, but I mean, yeah,
Right.
it's weird. They've never drawn, so I think that's interesting. So
that is. Yeah. So I mean, there's a.
But I kind of feel like that's where it's going. Yeah, I mean, I do. Yeah, I mean, a win like maybe seems ambitious, right? I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
Austin's had one of those, but that was a pretty remarkable game. That was Brad Stuber getting injured, adrenaline.
Sure.
Danny Perez put it in the Louvre goal, and that really nice Driussi goal, which ended up being the game winner. But that was, to me, that was kind of a lightning in the bottle special, 2022 magic and energy kind of match, right? So whereas not the same not the same as that season for sure. All right, well, yeah, that's kind of what I'm feeling too. I'm kind of feeling the exact kind of like 1-1 meh kind of energy, right? So something that'll be fun.
What do you think? Although I will say, if Herrera is available and comes in for the what do you think? Maybe final 20 minutes of the second half.
30,
that's going to be interesting to see. Well, what kind of? I mean, he's not going to be even close to match fit, but I mean, he's so talented. The impact he can make in a short time is
for sure. Yeah,
unlimited. So.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's a weird X factor. Yeah, maybe it's a thing where Austin lucks into a goal early, maybe it's a PK, something like that. And then maybe Herrera comes on and ends up, getting some kind of late draw to happen. So maybe, I don't know. We'll see. That's why they play the games. So Colby, thanks so much for being on. And do you have any predictions for future Austin FC emergencies as we?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun. Wow, man, I do not have any predictions for any future emergencies at the moment. I'd have to think on that one for a bit. And as you know, it's always, I think it's always easier to cover a team that's winning than losing. So we don't necessarily I think the best quote I've heard about the journalism profession, and I give him credit, Gabe DeArmond from Power Mizzou. He said, as a journalist, you don't root for teams, but you do root for people sometimes.
Yeah.
So I'll just leave it at that. From that standpoint, I'll say it's more enjoyable to cover team. 2022 was more enjoyable to cover than 2023.
Agreed. So yeah, when you have to ask the same questions after another loss, yeah, that can get kind of tedious. Yeah, like people will ask me if I am wolf out or wolf in, and I always squarely say that I am narrative in. So
yeah, right, exactly.
I root for storylines. I root for fun, good things to say. And yeah, like in 2022, when it's like, oh, they just beat LAFC 4-1, that's more fun than, oh, how much longer will this winless streak go?
Yeah, I mean, the last June, the end of June last year and early July, we got a three match winning streak. And then basically from Leagues Cup till the end of the regular season, like you just said, it was a
lot of L's.
I mean, it was rough to cover.
There's that DC game. That DC game wasn't even that fun, right?
Right. I mean, you get in some of those. I mean, some of those press conferences after losses. And look, I know it's our job. I mean, they get awkward. So, and I mean,
not doing anything we're doing, right?
I mean, I think we're, yeah. I mean, they just even yeah, well, I'll just leave it at they get you know, there are just questions sometimes. You know, you've got to be look at the team. If the team loses, it's our job to ask you weren't playing well. Why did you not play well?
Mhm.
And you know, and sometimes that leads to not just Austin FC. It's any sport.
Mhm.
I mean, it's any professional team or sport where you know just covering teams and rough patches gets interesting sometimes.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. That's why it's always good to ask numbers-based questions. Like, these numbers said you were garbage. I'm not saying you're garbage. But look at these numbers.
Well, right, and you know, I mean,
I mean,
yeah, I mean, look,
not literal garbage, right? So not
no,
even
no, 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 no,
garbage.
no. No, I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
It is, I mean, it is interesting. Like, yeah, just kind of, I mean, we're kind of meandering a little bit, but I do think
Sure.
it's interesting too, just that, and you've experienced this, and maybe let's kind of end on your thoughts on this note. Just the kind of journalistic remove that you have in the press box as somebody covering it rather than a fan. I don't know if you've noticed this too, but I've noticed that with Austin FC, like my highs are not as high, my lows are not as low. I mean, certainly, yes, I like winning. I like seeing the team do well. I like seeing these people that we're getting to know, enjoy success. But I found myself way more muted in kind of the exaltations I might have or the expressions of frustration and distraught that I might have. Like last year, I think like was it last year or the year before? I remember like it looked like Redis was going to get a goal like late in a game, and it's the most animated I think the press box has ever been. Like we all kind of as one were cheering, openly cheering for Redis to score, and that has like never happened.
I vaguely remember that. Yeah, I do remember Redis scoring. I remember vaguely
He didn't score in
remember
this
that.
one. He scored in the Open Cup game against New Mexico, and that was kind of similar. But yeah, I mean, do you feel that? I mean, do you feel that you are less high, less low, kind of more even keeled when it comes to watching?
Yeah, I mean, I would hope so and like to think so. I mean, I think yourself, Eric Goodman, me, the TV guys, you know, other people. I'm not intentionally leaving anyone out. I just can't think of everyone at the moment. I think we all do a good job of being professional and keeping that journalistic integrity. Also, like I am not being from here. Like I maybe I grew up rooting for a different MLS team.
Right.
So I don't know if this makes any sense to whereas like
Yeah.
it's like I said before, I think now you try and you root for people and not teams. And that's what I try to, and you try and be a professional journalist while you are covering the team, but while at the same time, just the fact that you do deal with individuals twice a week, sometimes 3 or 4 times a week, especially when the schedule is going to ramp up like it will in May,
God.
where I'm not rooting for Austin FC, but like you mentioned, it is nice to see these people you deal with a lot have personal success,
Mhm.
which some people may say, well, there's no difference between the two. And I would just disagree with that.
Mhm.
So,
Sure. Yeah. 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 I get that. Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks so much. Appreciate having you
right.
on, and I'll catch you at a future emergency at some later date.
Hey, glad to do it, man. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, that's hopefully sometime down the road, I'll be fortunate enough to come on again. This was fun.
It'll happen. And thank you for reminding me about the ramp up in May. I'm not ready for that.
It's gonna be crazy. It's gonna be a
Oh,
crazy month.
it will.
Wow.
All right. All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks.